Good morning. Let me start by thanking the organizers, IEFA Latam. It's really an honor to be here. What I will speak today is about broad trends and challenges in the region, in the Latam region. But being here in Argentina, it's impossible not to say a few words on how we see the country. The new authorities are decisively implementing an ambitious stabilization plan to steer the economy away from crisis and to restore macro stability. As you may know, the plan is centered on a strong fiscal anchor that eliminates completely any central bank financing of the government, along with policies to bring down inflation, rebuild reserves, and tackle distortions and long-standing impediments to growth in the country. Progress so far has been impressive. A fiscal surplus, an overall fiscal surplus, was recorded in January and February for the first time in over a decade. International reserves are being rebuilt. Inflation is falling more quickly than at least we anticipated. And market indicators like the exchange rate gap, the parallel market, and sovereign spreads continue to improve. But the inheritance was heavy, and the path to stabilization is never easy, requiring steadfast policy implementation all throughout. In this regard, it's very important to continue improving the quality of the fiscal adjustment. Stress under stress, quality, not quantity. Monetary policy will also need to continue to adapt through this transition. And the unwinding of the exchange rate controls that exist will need to be very carefully calibrated. Moreover, we think that it will be important to sustain the efforts to support vulnerable segments of the population to ensure that the burden of the adjustment does not fall disproportionately on working families. From the IMF part, our engagement with the authorities is deep and constructive. We focus on technical aspects, on designing policies to durably restore macroeconomic stability in Argentina. Moreover, we share the authorities' vision of creating a more open and market-oriented economy. And that will provide greater prosperity to all Argentinians. With this, let me move back to the region. So it's impossible to talk about the region without looking first at the world economy. And here, I would like to basically start from the fact that the global economy seems to be achieving something that is very difficult, that is a soft landing. We were with very high inflation not long ago, very tight monetary policies all throughout the world, and the economy decelerated, of course, but it didn't continue falling. In the left chart here, you see our last round of projections. And of course, 2023 was sluggisher than the previous year. But we're expecting that the floor is around here. And inflation has come down almost everywhere and is at levels very close to what was before the increase of inflation. This is very important for the region, of course. A world growing and a world with more normal interest rates is very different for the region. In terms of growth projections, here I would like to mention three things. First, as I said before, the global economy is performing well. However, our medium-term forecasts are the lowest since we do forecast at the fund, since the 80s. So that means that there is a long-term growth issue in the world economy that we have to look at. Second point, the US has been really amazing, has surprised to the upside. The smaller numbers here the font that is smaller, is the change in forecast that we had in almost a year. And then you see that the US has been growing about 1% more than expected. And it continues to do this, to surprise us. China and the euro area, and that's my final point, has been more sluggish. China in this secular deceleration that they need to manage, and the euro area has surprising to the downside. What about the region? The region, I would say, is normalizing growth. What does it mean, normalizing growth? Basically, that countries are going back to their normal trend that is based on their capacities today, past reforms, the normal velocity. Latam overall is decelerating, but this is mainly because Mexico and Brazil are so large in the economy, in the region, that they basically dominate averages, no? And these two countries, Brazil and Mexico, as you see there, have been surprising to the upside immensely. They grew around 3% last year. They should go more to the 2% range this year and next year. Basically, but that's their normal velocity now. Those are the two countries basically decelerating. Other countries, for example, Chile and Colombia, did very poorly last year, but that was basically the reflection of overheating after COVID. These two countries put immense fiscal and monetary policy, grew a lot before. They have to normalize now. And it's desired that they decelerate a bit, and now they are starting to pick up again. And Paraguay, Peru, and Uruguay, interestingly, they surprised very negatively last year. Why is this? Well, basically because we had climate shocks in these economies that were very heavy. Also in Argentina, by the way, last year. Okay, behind this, of course, is a global environment that is not that supportive. If you look at what is going on within countries, we see that economic activity in goods, for example, is decelerating more. Trade is less vibrant than before, and interest rates are much higher than before. And that's a new reality. Long-term interest rates in the world economy are higher than 2 or 3 years ago. And my view, at least, is that probably we'll go back to rates that we had not in the last decade, but the previous decade. And we have to plan according to that. Labor markets in the region remain super strong. The level of employment went back to trend. And if you look at unemployment rates, and this is in the right-hand side chart, the best performing countries, Mexico and Brazil, have unemployment rates well below historical averages. The other is more close to average, but it's a good outcome at the end, what we have been seeing. And inflation is coming down everywhere. Very close to targets in some places. In some other places, there is a bit more work to do. What is behind this? Of course, global prices have normalized, as I mentioned before. But also the region did monetary policy in a way that was probably unique in the world. Very timely, fast, and considerable tightening. And rates increased, and now we are in the process of easing interest rates in the region. We think that this should continue. Of course, there are risks. The pace of this depends on each country. But overall, let me tell you from the right-hand side chart here that real interest rates, that is the policy rate minus inflation expectations, are still pretty high in the region. So there is a space to continue this easing. What are the macro challenges in the region? Let me mention what at least I see as the most two pressing ones. One is the level of debt. The region was very active in doing fiscal policy during COVID. You see in the first chart there, a V, no? That fiscal deficits increased a lot. They dropped. But look at how they recovered very quickly. In 2022, the region already went back to quote-unquote normal. That didn't happen around the world. Europe is still adjusting to what happened at that time. So to a large extent, the region was very responsible, put a lot of impulse, but took it timely. However, the level of debt is not coming from that exercise. It's coming from before. As you see in the middle chart, debt was rising well before COVID and very fast. And now the true homework is how we stabilize this debt. Plans are for further adjustment in many countries. Many have fiscal rules. Now it's time to deliver on those plans. And it's not easy. You see finance ministers everywhere struggling with the political process to deliver on these plans. But this is very important because this, at the end of the day, represents a fundamental variable for the level of interest rates, access to markets, etc. The second challenge is how to grow faster. I mentioned before that the region was recovering, going to normal, etc. But our normal is too low. The chart with the dots here represents what we expected of long-term growth 10 years ago and today. The diagonal of 45 degrees is, if you are there, we expected the same before as today. If you are below the diagonal, means that today we're expecting lower potential growth than we were expecting 10 years ago. And the bad news is that basically the entire region is well below the 45-degree line. That means that we're with an economy that has a capacity to grow that is lower than before. And we need to grow to work on this extensively. What has happened in the last decades basically is that our region has not converged to the US. Other regions in the right-hand side chart, you see emerging Europe and emerging Asia, both have been sort of chasing and getting closer to the US. Our region actually has diverged a bit. So that's the main second challenge that we have. These two challenges happen in a world that is more complex. And I will be finishing now. For the fiscal part, but also for growth, we face a world with higher interest rates and more public debt in the world economy. Those two things make more difficult to sustain higher debt because you have to pay more interest. And also there's a competition in markets for issuance. No? Many countries are issuing more than before. And the second big challenge around the world for us is that the world is much more fragmented. We have several wars going on. There are geopolitical tensions of all sorts. And this matters. If you look at trade over GDP, and that's the left-hand, the first chart there, you see that trade increased a lot in the world in the period of globalization, between the mid-80s until the great crisis of 2008. And those were very good years for many countries in the region. In the last 10 years, this has been flat, showing exactly that globalization is having more troubles. And these geopolitical tensions, we see it like in the short run. This bar chart basically shows the story of what has happened to trade within blocks and across blocks of two blocks, those who voted for supporting or against Ukraine in the invasion of the Russia to Ukraine. So you see that these two blocks basically are trading much less than before. That, again, has impact for the region. That doesn't mean that we don't have to do the homeworks. We have to redouble the efforts for that. So my main message is basically just to finish. The world economy seems to be getting this soft landing, and the US here is critical. In LAC, as I mentioned before, growth is normalizing. Inflation is going to targets. The combination of inflation targeting, floating regimes have been working very well in several countries. We think that monetary policy easing should continue in several countries. It's key to deliver on fiscal consolidation, and the big homework is how to improve potential output growth. Here, the list of things to do is very long, but let me just mention that we need, for example, to tackle crime. We need more social cohesion, but there's a long list of other things in education, in rules, in rule of law that need to be improved for really having potential output growth more at the level of other emerging markets that are successful emerging markets in the world. Thank you very much.